So I'm here with Bruce Wexler, and Bruce is a professor in psychiatry at Yale University, and we were here to talk about a book that Bruce has written, which I'm strongly recommending to you to read, and it's called Brain and Culture. And what Bruce has done is look at the implications of the neuroscience of brain plasticity and trying to understand how that contributes to a reconsideration of how we think about what we are and how we relate to the culture into which we just happen to have been born. And Bruce, do you want to talk to us a little bit about the genesis of this book idea and how you came onto this really interesting subject of trying to relate these aspects of the brain science to the evolution of culture and how a person operates in culture?
Well, actually, I started just trying to re-educate myself about neuroscience after having been out of school for 25 years and all the wonderful changes that have happened in that time.
Right.
And I didn't know where that re-education effort would take me in terms of, I didn't have an argument to start with that I was trying to promote. And one of the things I became very aware of very quickly was work that you had done and other people about the importance of neuroplasticity and how that is a defining aspect of the way we relate to our environments, and particularly so for human beings.
Right.
Because our plastic potential as human beings is greater for a number of reasons than that of any other animal. And when you put that together with the fact that we're the only animals that shape the environments, that shape our brains,
Right.
you have a wonderful potential that evolution has created for us.
We evolve in a culture that we have to fit into, and we can fit into it because of our incredible ability to adjust our brains
Exactly.
to match it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So the basic science work, as you know, started first with looking at physical stimuli, like showing animals or looking at studies in human beings,
Right.
just as a function of whether they get light into their eyes and brain or not, or they see certain types of physical features. But it was rapidly extended to the social interactions,
Right.
because from social or conspecific interactions with other members of your own species, you get a lot of sensory input that's very important to the shaping of the brain.
Right.
Actually, the work of Harlow and Mears years ago established the fact that nursing itself is in the service of ensuring that the offspring have continuing very close contact with the mother and with the parenting adults.
Right. And through that attachment with the wider social group. I mean, that's
Exactly.
all a critical part of
The extended family
fitting into the
community.
world into which you live. First in the small unit, the family, and then to the tribe, and then ultimately to wider society.
Exactly. So then what happens as we develop is that our brains are shaped by the environment. It happens to be a human-made environment. And that capacity for our brains to shape themselves to the environment in which they're growing makes for a fit between the individual and the environment they live in. So understanding that helps us understand actually a lot about the way we relate to the environment, a lot about the importance of early education, has implications for social policy. It integrates a lot of psychological research and developmental research that had been done before. This concept and understanding of the centrality of neuroplasticity in the
Right.
development of our brains is it's a hub of a wheel that organizes
Right.
a lot of information that scientists from different disciplines have collected really over the last 100 years. And that's what I discovered in my self-educating
One of the
efforts.
things you do really nicely in your book is then you talk about, you raise the obvious issue, but not only so obvious when you write about it and think about it, and that is that what happens when your worldview is disrupted, or when, you talk about the case of someone, for example, creating a model of a world in which they grow up in, and then moving to a new world, as it were, as
Right.
an immigrant, or creating a model that's dependent upon certain close connections with other people around them, and then losing one of those individuals
Exactly.
to death or in some other way, and the disruptive, powerful consequences that can generate in an individual.
So our brains shape themselves to the environment when we're young and when we're born without much structure to start with.
Right.
And once we get established structures that are culture specific,
Right.
those established structures tend to be self-maintaining in a variety of ways that psychologists have identified for us. For example, we identify with people who have the same opinions we have.
Right.
So we get input coming into us that matches what we already have.
Sure.
And there are a variety of other mechanisms by which we then maintain a fit between the internal structures developed by our culture, and we go out into the world and we select input from that world that matches what's inside.
Sure.
But as you say, there are certain times in life when the environment changes so much that creates a misfit between the external and the internal, and that is very difficult for us to deal with. And so, again, using neuroplasticity is the core of our understanding of the relationship between ourselves, our minds, our brains, and our environments. It helps illuminate what happens when, for example, a spouse dies.
Right.
So somebody who's such a rich, major part of one's internal structures and one's external world is now suddenly gone from the external world. So
it's losing a part of yourself, really, which you've constructed in your brain. It really is losing a part of this person that you are.
It's interesting that you say that, because 25% of people have a clinical syndrome called pathological grief. And one of the symptoms on the checklist for pathological grief is, I feel like I've lost, the part of myself has died when the spouse has died.
That's literally true.
It is literally true. We take the outside into us and into our internal structures. So it takes a year of hard work to restructure these internal representations so they match the changed world. Another prototypic example of this is when immigrants moved from one culture to another. So the culture that had shaped their brains created a certain brain structure, internal representations of the world, which are self-maintaining, highly conserved, as you say. And now they're suddenly in a new environment where things don't match. And there's some very vivid accounts of this by very good writers who talk about what it's like to live in that moment when there's no longer the same fit between internal and external.
It also explains the incredibly powerful urges people have as immigrants to keep with others, to operate with other immigrants.
That's right. They create a microcopy of their old environment. It's the best they can in their new environment.
Desperately trying to hang on to the world that they've constructed in their brain, that they've internalized.
And because it feels better. There's another line of research that shows literally that it feels better, it's physiologically more comfortable if there's a fit between the internal and the external. And let me just take this one step further then, because it also helps illuminate the difficulties we have as human beings on the social level when different cultures come in contact. And this is a new occurrence in the history of our species, because we lived in isolation long enough in separate communities so that literally there's 6,000 different languages spoken in the world today. Not dialects, but languages that developed because communities were isolated enough. And there's been growing literature, scientific literature now, that demonstrates that we can actually see the differences in the way people's brains work and minds think because they were raised in different cultures.
Of course, they have to be different.
If it's shaped by the culture to start with, you would certainly think that
it's not just culture, but it's also the culture evolving so that a young person now in their experiences in a modern environment can have a very different worldview, a very different set of internal constructs from a person our age.
Absolutely.
I mean, and could be every bit as different from the point of view of the transformation of the neurology as would be the difference from one cultural group from another across the planet.
Absolutely, especially if you go over a little bit longer period of time, of a few generations, and you just look in the West here over 100 years, and they're very different cultures and
so
mindsets.
For all of the curmudgeons out there that are older, not understanding that it's not your worldview. That doesn't mean it's not a valid worldview, it's just different.
Well, music is one of the things that's so funny and interesting that way. Each generation of teenagers develops their own music. And their parents say, how can you listen to that stuff?
Horrible stuff.
How can you call it music even? And the parents say this even though they have the exact same experience as themselves when they were teenagers with their own parents. So it does absolutely relate to intergenerational issues. And when you talk about us curmudgeons out there, it's also having this information, and understanding this about ourselves and our brains actually can give us some more control over that. And as you know, with the work we're doing collaboratively here at Posit Science, but also the other work that you're doing in your laboratories, many scientists are now now we understand this aspect of how our minds and brains work and relate to the environment. And what happens is, as you progress through life, are working to uncover that plastic potential that remains and to help people remain more adaptable as they get older.
Absolutely, because we do have the capacity to adapt. It's not that it's easy, but we do have the capacity to make these transformations. It's effortful. And I think having this greater understanding, and this is the message of this book, and I think that I would strongly urge individuals that are interested in this subject in general to look for Brain and Culture, Bruce's important book on this subject, as a source of enlightenment and understanding. Because these are things that we all have to absorb. It's part of the new science the new neuroscience, basically, that's providing us with a richer understanding of what we are and where we come from and how we fit in and how we relate to other people that have different experiences than we do. So I strongly recommend that you look for this book as something that maybe your book club or whatever, something really worthwhile to read and think about.
Thank you, Mike.